Rain lashed against the glass walls of the Plaza Hotel, turning Manhattan's skyline into a blur of silver and gold. Inside the penthouse suite, Ethan Cole raised a crystal glass of champagne, the bubbles catching the glow of the chandelier above. Across from him, Sabrina Voss's company's seductive PR executive laughed softly, her red lips brushing against the rim of her flute. The air between them shimmered with danger, perfume, and betrayal. He had told himself it was just a night to celebrate the deal that made him a billionaire again. A harmless escape from the pressure, from the baby cries echoing in his mind. "To freedom," Sabrina whispered, clinking her glass against his. Her eyes glowed like molten amber. Ethan didn't realize that, in that moment, freedom came with a price far beyond his wealth. His phone buzzed on the marble counter. A text from Clara's wife appeared briefly on the screen. "The baby has a fever. Please come home." He turned it face down. Sabrina's hand slid over his. Music thumped faintly from the adjoining room. And outside, thunder cracked. Hours later, the suite was quiet, scented with champagne and regret. Sabrina slept soundly under silk sheets while Ethan stood by the window, watching lightning crawl across the city. For a fleeting second, he thought of Claire's gentle voice, her tired eyes, the way she used to whisper, "I believe in you," before every big meeting. But belief had long been replaced by ambition. He convinced himself he'd make it up to her tomorrow. When dawn broke, he left the hotel, his head pounding, his tie loose around his neck. The streets of Fifth Avenue gleamed with morning rain. He stopped at a Starbucks, ordered a black coffee, and stared at his reflection in the glass-door expensive suit, hollow eyes, a stranger staring back. By the time he reached his penthouse, the air felt wrong. Too quiet. No lullaby from the nursery. No scent of baby lotion or fresh coffee. His gut twisted. "Claire?" he called out, his voice echoing off the walls. Silence. Then he saw at the crib, empty. The baby's blanket folded neatly on the rocking chair. His heart pounded as he noticed the envelope on the counter, her handwriting painfully familiar. He tore it open. Inside was a single page and the house key. The words were short, trembling, but clear. "Last night, while you were with her, our son's fever hit 103. I waited for you. I finally understood I was waiting for a man who doesn't exist." The key slipped from his hand, hitting the marble with a sharp, hollow sound. Rain streaked the window like tears. His phone buzzed again, Sabrina texting. Last night was unforgettable. Ethan sank to his knees, realizing the truth too late. His wife and newborn were gone, and so was everything that ever made him human. The elevator doors slid open to silence. Ethan stepped inside his Manhattan penthouse, a space once filled with warmth, laughter, and the soft hum of a baby's lullaby. Now, it felt like a mausoleum. The scent of baby powder lingered faintly in the air, mixing cruelly with the sterile chill of the marble floors. His expensive shoes clicked with every step, echoing through the emptiness that surrounded him. "Claire." His voice trembled. No answer. Only the low hum of the refrigerator and the distant rumble of thunder. He called again, louder this time, but the only reply was the hollow echo of his own voice. On the dining table sat a baby bottle half filled with milk, cold and untouched. Next to it, a framed photo of the three of them taken just 2 weeks ago in Central Park. Claire's smile was soft, tired, but radiant. Ethan's hand rested proudly on her shoulder. He remembered that day vividly. She had joked about how he never changed diapers. And he'd laughed, promising he'd start tomorrow. There would be no tomorrow. Not anymore. Panic surged through him. He grabbed his phone, dialing her number again and again, straight to voicemail. He called the hospital, no recent admissions. Called her best friend, no answer. Every second felt heavier, as if the walls were closing in. He stumbled into the nursery, a place Claire had painted herself in pale shades of blue and cream. The rocking chair creaked slightly, swaying from the draft of the open window. On the dresser, her wedding ring gleamed beside a folded note. The handwriting was hers, calm, deliberate, final. "Don't look for us. You've already chosen who you are." His breath caught. For the first time in years, Ethan Cole, the man who conquered New York's skyline, felt powerless. He sank onto the nursery floor, clutching the note. The city that once bowed to him now loomed like an indifferent giant beyond the glass. A knock startled him. He opened the door to find his assistant, Brian, holding a tablet. "Sir, we've got a problem," he said cautiously. "The press just published a piece about last night. Photos. You and Sabrina at the plaza." Ethan froze. "What?" Brian turned the screen toward him. Headlines blared. "Real estate tycoon celebrates with mystery woman while wife cares for newborn." Beneath it, a photo of Ethan and Sabrina laughing, champagne glasses raised, the city glowing behind them. His stomach twisted. Within minutes, his phone erupted, calls from investors, board members, journalists. His empire trembled. Years of reputation undone overnight. Sabrina had promised discretion, but she had also filmed everything. He could already hear her voice from the night before, sweet, practiced, dangerous. "Relax, Ethan. No one has to know." Now, everyone did. He stumbled toward the liquor cabinet and poured himself a glass of whiskey. His hands shook so badly the liquid splashed onto the counter. On the floor near the door lay a small blue sock, his son's. He picked it up, pressing it to his face, the smell of baby powder hitting him like a blade. For a moment, he imagined Claire standing there, whispering softly, "He needs you." But all he heard was the echo of his own choices. A storm gathered over the city, lightning streaking across the skyline like judgment. His reflection in the glass window looked foreign eyes, bloodshot, tie undone, face hollow. Ethan Cole had built skyscrapers, bought senators, and bent markets to his will. But now, he couldn't even find his wife. And somewhere, deep inside, he knew. This was only the beginning of his punishment. Morning light spilled through the tall windows of Sabrina Voss's luxury apartment on Fifth Avenue. The place smelled of vanilla candles and victory. She sat cross-legged on a cream sofa, scrolling through her phone as headlines about Ethan's scandal exploded online. Her lips curled into a smile. "Poor Claire," she whispered mockingly, stirring her oat milk latte. She never understood what kind of man she married. Ethan stood near the floor-to-ceiling window, his jaw clenched, staring down at the city that once worshipped him. Every news outlet was running the same story. Billionaire Ethan Cole's secret night at the plaza. Photos of him with Sabrina at the bar, laughing, touching her hand. His board was calling non-stop, his investors demanding an explanation. "This is your idea of discretion," he snapped. His voice echoed off the marble floors. Sabrina didn't even flinch. "Relax, Ethan. The media forgets faster than they forgive. A few donations. A few interviews about mental health and pressure. You'll be the misunderstood genius by next week." He glared at her, feeling a surge of disgust. "You don't get it. Claire's gone with my son. Do you understand that?" Sabrina finally looked up, feigning sympathy. "You told me she was fragile. Maybe she finally broke." His hand slammed against the wall. "You think this is funny?" She smirked. "I think it's ironic. You wanted freedom, didn't you? Well, now you have it." Her phone buzzed, and she tilted it toward him. It was a message from an anonymous source. "Offer stands. $500,000 for the footage." Beneath the text was a blurred thumbnail, Ethan, shirtless, kissing her shoulder at the plaza. He froze. "You recorded me?" "Insurance, darling," she said smoothly, setting the phone aside. "You're not the first man to promise forever and deliver betrayal. I've learned to protect myself." He took a step toward her, rage flashing in his eyes. "Delete it." "Or what?" she whispered, standing up to meet his height. "You'll hit me? Threaten me? You might have scared your wife with that billionaire tone, but I'm not her. I'm the one who knows what you look like when you're weak." Ethan's breath came hard. He turned, pacing the room, running both hands through his hair. Every second near her felt poisonous. His phone rang. It was his CFO. He answered quickly, voice tight. "Ethan," the man said nervously, "we have a situation. Someone just sold insider documents to Holt Capital. They're preparing a hostile takeover. We're bleeding shares by the minute." "Holt?" Ethan muttered. "Raymond Holt?" "Yes. And there's more. The documents came from your private server. It was accessed under Sabrina Voss's credentials." Ethan's gaze snapped toward her. Sabrina was smiling calm, almost proud. "You sold me out," he said in disbelief. She shrugged. "Business, baby. Holt offered me protection and options. You offered me lies." He stared at her as the realization hit. Claire hadn't been the only one planning an escape. He'd been living in a web spun by every lie he'd ever told. He grabbed his jacket, heading for the door. "This isn't over." Sabrina's voice followed him like silk and venom. "Oh, it's over, Ethan. You just haven't accepted it yet." The elevator doors closed behind him, trapping his reflection in mirrored walls, his tie askew, his face pale, eyes burning with fear. For the first time in his life, Ethan Cole wasn't the predator. He was the prey. And as the elevator descended, he knew one thing with icy certainty. Sabrina Voss had just destroyed him exactly the way he had destroyed Claire. Rain turned to sleet as Ethan Cole's black Mercedes roared through the night, its headlights cutting across empty highways leading north. The windshield wipers beat like a frantic heartbeat. For 3 days, he hadn't slept. Every mile he drove felt like a confession. Somewhere beyond the frozen horizon was Claire, and the child he'd never truly met. He gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. His phone, mounted on the dash, displayed the last trace of her credit card use, a bookstore in Portland, Maine. She had always loved bookstores. The small, quiet ones where people still spoke softly, like faith wasn't extinct. He remembered once teasing her for buying paperbacks instead of reading on her iPad. "Some things are worth feeling in your hands," she had said. He hadn't understood then. He did now. The city lights of Portland appeared in the distance, muted, fog-drenched, indifferent. He parked outside a brick bookstore called Harbor Pages and stepped into the cold, salt-scented air. Inside, a woman with silver hair looked up from the counter. "Can I help you?" she asked. He flashed a photo of Claire on his phone. "She was here 3 days ago. Did she say where she was going?" The woman hesitated, eyes softening. "She had a baby with her. Bought a few books. Goodnight Moon, and a copy of Women Who Run with the Wolves. Paid in cash. Asked about rentals near the coast." Ethan's chest tightened. "Did she leave a number?" "She didn't. But she looked determined. Like someone who wasn't coming back." He left the store, snow falling heavier now, coating the street in silence. The PI he'd hired called a few minutes later. "Cole, you won't like this," the man said. "Your wife's car was found abandoned outside Rockport. No sign of her or the baby. Just this." Static crackled before Ethan heard it, a baby crying, faint but real. "Where did that come from?" Dashcam footage from a local delivery truck. Time stamped the same night she disappeared. She was talking to a man before getting into another vehicle. The plates are untraceable. A man? Ethan's pulse spiked. Who? We don't know yet. But whoever he is, he's smart. Every digital footprint of hers vanished an hour after she met him. Bank accounts emptied, phone wiped, GPS disabled. She didn't just leave, Cole. She erased herself. The call ended, leaving Ethan alone with the sound of wind howling off the Atlantic. He looked out toward the black waves crashing against the rocks, realizing that Claire hadn't run in fear. She had planned this. Someone had helped her. Back in Manhattan, the world was feasting on his downfall. Sabrina had leaked another video clip, him whispering in her ear at the plaza. "The wife's asleep, baby," he'd said in that recording. A phrase now plastered across every tabloid headline. His board voted to remove him permanently. His accounts were frozen. Reporters camped outside his penthouse, shouting questions about Claire's disappearance. He ignored them all, staring at the single clue he had left, a baby sock found in her SUV. He kept it in his pocket now, like a confession he couldn't escape. At midnight, a new email appeared in his inbox. No sender, no subject line. Just one sentence. "You taught me that power can destroy everything. Now you'll learn what it feels like to lose it." Attached was a photo. Claire standing on a cliff by the sea, wind whipping her hair, their baby bundled in her arms. She looked strong, free, untouchable. Ethan's throat tightened. For the first time in his life, the man who had conquered Manhattan realized he might never win her back. Long before Ethan Cole became the ruthless name flashing across business magazines, he was just a broken man lying in a hospital bed, staring at ceiling tiles he couldn't count. 7 years earlier, a car accident had left him with 2 fractured ribs and a shattered collarbone. The night it happened, he'd been driving too fast through Manhattan rain, furious after losing a deal. Fate, cruel and calculated, had brought him to Mount Sinai Hospital and to her. Claire Morgan. She wasn't like the women Ethan was used to. No designer heels, no champagne laughter. Her hair was tied up in a messy bun, wisps falling across her forehead as she checked his IV. She smelled faintly of lavender and antiseptic. "You're lucky," she said, her voice calm but firm. "The car's totaled, but your heart's still beating. Try to keep it that way." He'd smirked through the pain. "You always talk to your patients like this?" "Only the arrogant ones," she replied, scribbling notes on his chart. For the first time in years, someone looked at him and didn't see money or power. She saw a man bleeding, scared, and stubborn. During his 3-week recovery, she became his anchor. They'd talk at night when the city outside went quiet. She told him about her childhood in Vermont, how she'd lost her mother to illness, how she worked double shifts to pay nursing school. He told her nothing about business, just his dreams of one day building something that mattered. On his last day, he tried to give her an envelope with cash, a thank you for her kindness. She pushed it back. "You can't buy gratitude, Mr. Cole. Some things you just feel." He'd watched her walk away, that quiet confidence burning into his memory. Months later, he showed up at her hospital with flowers and a simple request: coffee. She hesitated but said yes. That coffee turned into dinners, laughter, and long walks through Central Park. By the next spring, she was Mrs. Claire Cole. In the early years, their love was something sacred. They lived in a modest apartment on the Upper West Side, eating Chinese takeout on the floor, laughing about nothing. She used to draw little hearts on his napkins before he left for work. "Don't forget why you started," she'd whisper. But the higher Ethan climbed, the less he looked down to see who was holding the ladder. Now, sitting in the dark of a roadside motel in Maine, he replayed those memories like a confession reel. He could almost hear her voice. "You can't buy gratitude." The same woman who once healed him was now the one destroying him with surgical precision. His phone buzzed again, another blow. His attorney texted, "Your wife withdrew your name from the joint trust fund." The transfer went through to a C. Morgan Foundation. He stared at the message, realization sinking like ice. That was her maiden name. She hadn't run away. She had rebuilt her identity. She'd learned from the man who taught her everything about control and turned those lessons against him. He poured another drink, but the whiskey burned like truth. The woman he'd once saved had become the one saving herself. A knock echoed through the motel's thin walls. Ethan froze. He opened the door to find a package lying on the floor. No return address. Inside was a single photograph, Claire smiling, holding their baby in front of a small clinic by the ocean. On the back, in her handwriting, "You once said you wanted to build something that mattered." "I did." The photo slipped from his hand as his chest tightened with a pain deeper than guilt. The morning after receiving Claire's photograph, Ethan Cole woke to the sound of his own breathing. Shallow, restless, human. The motel room was dim, smelling of damp carpet and stale whiskey. He hadn't slept. Guilt had replaced exhaustion as his companion. On the nightstand sat the photo of Claire and their child, both smiling under gray skies, framed by a hand-painted sign, Harbor Clinic. He picked it up again, studying every line of her face. There was something new in her eyes. Strength. A quiet, unshakable kind of power he'd never seen before. It terrified him. His phone buzzed. Sabrina's name flashed on the screen. He ignored it. It buzzed again, then again, until he finally answered. "What do you want?" he growled. "Relax," Sabrina purred. "Just checking in. You've gone off the grid. Bad for business." "There is no business anymore," he snapped. "Oh, there's always business," she said. "Especially when there's a child involved." Ethan froze. "What did you say?" Sabrina's tone shifted, soft, deliberate. "You think you're the only one with secrets, Ethan. You think your wife's the only woman who can disappear." He gripped the phone tighter. "If you're implying what I think you are—" "I'm not implying," she interrupted. "I'm telling you, I'm pregnant." Silence swallowed the line. It felt like a bullet had gone off behind his ribs. "That's impossible," he said quietly. "You're lying." "Maybe," she said, her smile audible through the phone. "But imagine what the tabloids would do with this story. Disgraced billionaire impregnates mistress while wife vanishes with newborn. It writes itself, doesn't it?" Ethan's knuckles whitened around the phone. "What do you want?" "A settlement," she said smoothly. $5 million. I'll disappear. Keep quiet. and the world never needs to know you're a monster twice over. He laughed bitterly. You really think I have that kind of money left? Holt's bleeding me dry. Lure. Oh, I know, she said. Which is why I also took the liberty of sending our little video to him. Let's just say he pays better than you do. The line went dead. Ethan stared into the cracked mirror above the sink. His reflection looked unfamiliar. Hollow eyes, days-old stubble, a suit that had once cost $3,000 now hanging loose on his frame. He saw the man Claire used to love, buried under arrogance and greed, and hated what stared back. A notification blinked across his phone. Breaking news. Raymond Holt expands holdings. Acquires Cole Realty subsidiary. It was official. The empire he built from nothing now belonged to the man who had once begged him for a job. The man who, rumor said, had dated Claire before she met Ethan. The world, it seemed, had a cruel sense of irony. Later that night, a knock came at his door. He opened it expecting reporters. Instead, it was a courier holding a brown envelope. No name, no return address. Inside, a single sheet of paper read, "You built your kingdom on betrayal. Now watch it crumble, one lie at a time." Attached was a flash drive. He plugged it into his laptop. Dozens of files appeared, board communications, financial transfers, evidence of insider trading. Sabrina's voice played faintly over the first recording. He doesn't care who he ruins, Raymond. Just make sure he never breathes the same air as her again. Ethan's stomach turned. His sins had come full circle. Every lie he'd told now had a voice. Every secret a witness. As he sat there, face lit by the glow of the screen, he realized the cruelest truth of all. He wasn't just betrayed. He had trained his betrayers. The enemy in his mirror had multiplied. Snow fell in thick, silent sheets outside the window of Ethan's motel room. The world beyond was white and unforgiving, like a blank page daring him to start over. He hadn't eaten in 2 days. Every call to his lawyer ended in another loss. Frozen accounts, seized assets, a pending federal investigation for insider trading. The empire that once bore his name now belonged to Raymond Holt. But the pain that cut deepest wasn't financial, it was the silence. No word from Claire, no sound of his child's cry, just an empty phone screen, mocking him with nothingness. He sat at the edge of the bed, head in his hands, when an email notification blinked across the laptop screen. The sender field was blank. The subject read, "Stop looking for her." Ethan's pulse quickened. He clicked it open. "She's safe. She doesn't need your apologies or your money. Keep searching, and I'll bury every secret you've ever hidden. You taught her to survive. She's learned better than you think." Below the text was a single attachment, a photo. Claire stood on a cliff overlooking the ocean, bundled in a dark coat, the baby in her arms. Behind her, a man stood slightly out of frame, broad shoulders. Familiar stance. Ethan zoomed in until his heart stopped. It was Michael Reed, Claire's older brother. Memories hit like shards of glass. Michael had been there the night Ethan proposed, shaking his hand reluctantly. He'd been at their wedding, whispering to Claire during the vows, "Don't let him turn you into a trophy." Ethan had brushed it off, calling him overprotective. Now, that same man was holding his wife's life in his hands. The phone rang, vibrating violently against the nightstand. A blocked number. Ethan hesitated, then answered. "Still trying to play savior," a deep voice said. "Michael, where is she?" Ethan demanded. "You don't have the right." Michael cut him off. "I have every right. You lost yours when you chose a hotel room over your family. You don't understand." Ethan shot back. "I made a mistake." "No," Michael interrupted coldly. "You made a pattern." Ethan's throat tightened. "Please, I just want to see my son." There was silence on the line. Then Michael's voice softened, almost pitying. "Your son doesn't need to see what a man looks like when he's destroying himself. Claire built something here. She's helping people again. She's happy." Ethan pressed his hand against his forehead. "If she's happy, then why the threats? Why the games?" "Because you don't give up, Ethan. You never have. So I'm giving you a reason to." "Oh, what do you mean?" "You remember the charity fund you used to move offshore accounts? The one under Holt's name?" Ethan froze. "That's sealed. Not anymore, Michael said. I have copies of everything. You follow her again, I'll leak it to every outlet in the country. Holt, Sabrina, the SEC, everyone will see what kind of man you really are. Ethan felt his stomach twist. You're blackmailing me? No, Michael said. I'm protecting her. Someone should have. Long ago. How does? The line went dead. For a long moment, Ethan just sat there, staring into the darkness. The only sound was the wind rattling the thin windows. He finally understood. Claire hadn't disappeared out of fear. She had escaped under protection. She had allies, people who'd learned how to fight the monster he'd become. Outside, a black SUV idled across the street. A silhouette sat inside, watching. Ethan moved to the window, but before he could blink, the vehicle's headlights flared, and it drove off into the snow. He realized then that Michael wasn't bluffing. Claire was somewhere close, and every step Ethan took toward her would bring him face to face not with her forgiveness but with his own destruction. Manhattan looked crueler in winter light, sharp, metallic, soulless. Ethan Cole walked into his former office on Park Avenue like a ghost, returning to the scene of his own execution. Cameras flashed outside the revolving doors. Reporters shouted questions about bankruptcy, betrayal, and missing wives. He ignored them all. Inside, the marble lobby that once bore his initials now displayed a gleaming silver plaque. Holt Capital Realty. Raymond Holt had officially won. The receptionist, a young woman who once jumped to her feet when Ethan entered, now avoided his eyes. "Mr. Holt isn't available," she murmured. Ethan smirked bitterly. "He will be. Shen." He pushed through the glass doors of the executive boardroom. Holt stood at the head of the table, his salt and pepper hair immaculate, his expression calm. Beside him sat Sabrina Voss, draped in crimson silk, crossing her legs like she owned the world. "Ethan," Holt said, his tone smooth. "What a surprise. To what do we owe the pleasure?" "You sold me out," Ethan hissed. "You used her to destroy me." Sabrina's smile widened. "Correction. You destroyed yourself. I just gave the world a front row seat." Holt chuckled softly. "Don't be dramatic. It's business. You made enemies, Ethan. I just gave them an invitation." Ethan slammed a folder onto the table. "You think this is over? I know about the offshore accounts, the tax shelters, the backroom deals." "Ah," Holt interrupted, raising an eyebrow. "Those accounts no longer exist. Your wife's brother made sure of that." Ethan froze. "Michael?" Holt leaned forward. "He's sharper than you ever gave him credit for. A very capable man. Claire was smart to trust him." The room tilted. For a moment, Ethan couldn't breathe. They all knew. Claire, Michael, Holt, Sabrina. They'd built a fortress of revenge around him, brick by brick. Sabrina stood and sauntered over, her perfume suffocating. "You should have seen her, Ethan," she said softly. "She didn't cry, didn't scream. She just smiled. Told me she hoped I'd enjoy cleaning up the mess you left behind." "When?" He stared at her, eyes burning. "What do you want?" "Honestly," she whispered. "I already have it." At that moment, Holt tossed a file across the table. "You're finished, Cole. There's an active warrant for financial misconduct. I've already spoken to the SEC. When they come for you, I suggest you cooperate. For the child's sake." The child. The word hit him like a hammer. Ethan grabbed the folder and stormed out. His world, the skyline he'd conquered, was crumbling faster than he could comprehend. Outside, the wind cut through his coat as he walked down Fifth Avenue, the city lights blurring into streaks of gold and gray. He reached for his phone, desperate for something familiar, someone to trust. There was only one contact left worth calling. He dialed Claire's old number. To his shock, it rang once, then connected. A breath on the other end. No words, just the faint sound of ocean waves. "Claire," he whispered. "Please, just tell me you're safe." Silence. Then, quietly, a voice that wasn't hers. "Michael, I warned you," he said. "Now it's too late." The line went dead. Moments later, Ethan's phone buzzed with a new message. No number, no name, just a video. He clicked play. Sabrina, sitting in a hotel suite, toasting champagne toward the camera. "Congratulations, Ethan," she said. "You just lost everything twice." "Ho." The clip ended with a sound that chilled him, a baby crying faintly in the background. His blood ran cold. The walls of Manhattan, the empire he once ruled, now felt like a prison closing in. Every path he took led him deeper into the trap he'd built himself. And this time, there was no one left to blame. The ocean in Rockport was the color of pewter that morning, calm but cold, the kind of stillness that carried its own warning. Claire Cole stood by the window of a small seaside cottage, cradling her baby in her arms, as gulls wheeled above the cliffs. The wind rattled the glass panes, but inside the cottage it was warm, filled with the faint smell of salt, milk, and the cedar crib Michael had built by hand. For the first time in months, she could breathe. No cameras, no secrets, no Ethan. The little boy, named Noah, slept soundly against her chest, his soft breaths matching the rhythm of the waves. Claire traced the tiny curl of his hair and whispered, "You're safe now." Her voice trembled as if speaking the words might make them true. Life in hiding had become a strange kind of peace. The town was small, the kind where everyone nodded but never asked questions. To the locals, she was Miss Morgan, a quiet nurse who'd opened a free clinic for fishermen's families. She spent her mornings tending to children with frostbitten cheeks and her evenings watching Noah dream beside the fireplace. On the table near the window lay a copy of Women Who Run with the Wolves and a half-empty Starbucks cup brought from Portland, small tokens of the world she'd left behind. Every night, she wrote letters she would never send. Letters to Ethan. Letters to the woman she used to be. "You once said we could survive anything. You lied. But maybe your lies gave me the courage to save our son." She folded the letter neatly, adding it to a growing stack inside a wooden box. Then she looked out at the horizon. The same horizon Ethan would have to cross if he ever found her. Michael entered quietly, carrying a basket of supplies from town. His presence filled the room like calm water. "How's Noah?" he asked. "Sleeping," she said softly. "Like he belongs to the sea." Michael smiled faintly. "You should rest too." Claire shook her head. "Rest doesn't help when you dream of the past." He hesitated, watching her trace the window with her finger. "You did the right thing, Claire." He had everything: power, money, influence, but he never protected what mattered. "I don't want revenge," she murmured. "I just want peace." Michael sighed. "Peace comes when the guilty stop chasing you." But Ethan Cole doesn't know how to stop. As if summoned by his words, a shadow moved across the cliffs outside. A sleek black Mercedes was parked near the rocks, its engine off, the driver's side door slightly open. Claire's pulse quickened. "Michael," she whispered, stepping back from the window. He moved quickly, pulling her toward the back room. "Stay here. Don't open the door." She clutched Noah close, her heart hammering. Through the crack in the curtain, she saw Michael stride outside, the wind whipping his coat. He approached the car, peered inside, empty. Only a phone sat on the passenger seat, its screen cracked, still playing a faint audio loop, Sabrina's voice. "You just lost everything twice." "Sean." Michael cursed under his breath and threw the phone into the sea. When he returned, his face was pale. "They're watching again," he said. "We have to move." Claire swallowed hard. "How did he find us?" "He didn't," Michael replied. "Someone wants him to think he did." That night, after Michael secured the doors, Claire sat by the fire, rocking Noah slowly. The flames flickered over the letter she held, one she hadn't written yet. "If you ever find this, Ethan, I hope you've learned what love costs when it's built on lies." Outside, the tide rose higher, erasing footprints in the sand. The past was coming for her. But this time, she wasn't the one who would run. The city that once worshipped Ethan Cole now treated him like a ghost. His penthouse had been seized, his name erased from the skyline he built, and his face plastered on financial scandal headlines. Each morning, tabloids outside courthouse steps shouted his new identity, the fallen king of Manhattan. But Ethan barely noticed. He spent his days in a rented studio overlooking the East River, his nights drowning in silence. He didn't drink anymore. The whiskey bottle stood unopened on the counter, like a relic of another life. Instead, he wrote. Every night, when the noise in his head got too loud, he sat at his desk and wrote to Claire. The first letters were angry, desperate apologies mixed with pride. "You took everything, Claire. But maybe you were right to." Then came regret. "I was there. but I wasn't present. I thought providing was the same as loving. I thought success could fill the spaces where love once lived. And finally, sorrow. I don't deserve to see him grow up. But if he laughs like you, if he has your eyes, then maybe there's still something good left in me. He never mailed any of them. The stack grew thicker, tied with a piece of string, sitting beside a single framed photo, Claire and him at their wedding, sunlight spilling through the chapel window. One evening, while he was writing, his laptop pinged with a new message. It was from a therapist he'd been referred to after the court hearings. Dr. Eva Moreno, grief and rehabilitation specialist. Their sessions began online, her voice calm and deliberate. "You're not being punished by others, Mr. Cole," she said once. "You're being punished by your own reflection." Ethan had stared at the screen for a long time before replying, "Then how do I forgive what I see?" Dr. Moreno smiled gently. "By rebuilding, piece by piece. You once built towers for money. Build something now for meaning." That night, he opened one of his old boxes, filled with awards and newspaper clippings, and fed them into the fireplace. Watching the flames devour his legacy, he whispered, "This was never worth her. Bon." But just as he began to feel something close to peace, the past clawed its way back. His attorney called. "Ethan, you should see this," the man said. "A journalist from the New York Chronicle is preparing an expose about Claire's new foundation. They're linking her funding to the accounts you once used offshore." Ethan's breath caught. "That's impossible. She doesn't even know about those. That's the problem. Someone's feeding them information. If this breaks, she'll lose everything." Phew. For the first time in months, Ethan felt adrenaline course through him. The story wasn't about him anymore. It was about her. About the one person he still had a chance to protect. He opened his old encrypted files, tracing the digital fingerprints that had planted the story. The trail led back to a single name, Sabrina Voss. Of course. She wasn't done yet. Ethan grabbed his coat and his notebook of letters. There was only one person who could help him stop her now. Raymond Holt. And though Holt had stolen everything from him, he also hated Sabrina just as much. Before leaving, Ethan looked down at his last unfinished letter to Claire. "You once said I built towers for my ego. Now I'm building one last thing, redemption." He folded the page, slipped it into his coat pocket, and walked into the cold night. For the first time in a long while, Ethan wasn't running from his mistakes. He was running toward them. The letter would remain unsent, but his actions would speak louder. Ethan Cole hadn't stepped inside a corporate office in months, but the moment he entered Holt Capital's high-rise on Park Avenue, the old instincts returned, the straightened shoulders, the steady stride, the aura of control. Only this time, control was an illusion. The guards eyed him suspiciously. His once respected name now lingered in the business world like a curse. He was here to face his greatest enemy, and maybe to save the only person who had ever mattered. Raymond Holt's assistant led him into a glass-walled boardroom. Holt stood at the far end, hands in his pockets, watching the snow fall over Manhattan. His suit was flawless, his calm unnerving. "You're either brave or desperate to walk in here, Cole," he said without turning. "Maybe both," Ethan replied. "But this isn't about us anymore. It's about Claire." "Shul." Holt finally faced him, one eyebrow raised. "You mean the woman you broke?" Ethan swallowed hard. "Someone's trying to destroy her foundation. They're linking her to my old offshore accounts. If the story goes public, she'll lose everything she's built." Holt studied him for a long moment, then smirked. "You sound sincere. That's new." "I'm not asking for forgiveness," Ethan said. "I'm asking for help." Holt poured 2 glasses of whiskey and handed him one. "You're too late. The leak didn't come from me. It came from Sabrina Voss." Ethan's grip tightened. "She's working with someone." Holt nodded. "A senator's aide. They're blackmailing each other, using you as collateral. Sabrina's demanding $5 million to bury the evidence. Typical of her." Ethan's stomach twisted. "If this goes live, Claire's name will be dragged through the mud. She doesn't deserve that." Holt leaned closer, voice low. "Neither did I, when you stole her from me 7 years ago." "Bull." The words hit harder than Ethan expected. "You think I planned any of this? I think you were blinded by ego, but maybe Holt hesitated, swirling the whiskey. Maybe you finally learned what it costs to be human. Then, help me, Ethan said quietly. Not for me, for her. Holt sighed. I'll make some calls. But if Sabrina's bluffing, she won't stop until someone stops her for good. Ethan left the building with his pulse pounding. Holt's words echoed in his head. The streets were slick with ice, neon lights reflecting off puddles like fractured glass. He walked for hours, his mind spinning with guilt and fury, until his phone buzzed. A message. From Sabrina Voss. Still playing hero? Meet me at the Langham. Midnight. Bring what's left of your soul. He arrived at the hotel just before midnight. Sabrina was waiting at the bar, dressed in black, eyes gleaming like polished obsidian. You look terrible, she said, sipping her martini. Redemption doesn't suit you. He sat across from her. You're dragging Claire into this now. She has nothing to do with you. Sabrina leaned forward. Oh, but she has everything to do with me. You left me for her long before you ever slept with me. Ethan frowned. What are you talking about? I wanted to be the woman who could save you, she said, her voice trembling slightly, for the first time, almost human. But she already was. You just didn't notice until it was too late. Shabi. He stared at her, realizing that beneath the venom, there was truth. I'll pay you nothing, he said. Release the files, and I'll expose myself. The world will know I lied, I cheated, I ruined her. But I'll also make sure everyone knows you did too. Sabrina's smirk faltered. You wouldn't. I already have, he said, standing. Check your email. Her eyes flicked to her phone. The color drained from her face as she read the subject line, Confession of a Broken Man, by Ethan Cole. He'd leaked his own story to the press before she could. For the first time, she looked small. You just burned your empire, she whispered. Ethan nodded. Exactly. Now you have nothing left to hold over me. He walked out of the Langham without looking back, the sound of her shattering glass echoing behind him. Outside, the snow was falling again, but for the first time, it didn't feel cold. The storm rolled in from the Atlantic like punishment itself, violent, relentless, and deafening. The sky above the Maine coastline was a bruise of gray and silver, waves slamming against the cliffs with the fury of something ancient. In the small seaside cottage, Claire Cole held her son close as thunder rattled the windows. Each crack of lightning illuminated the walls, where shadows danced like ghosts of her past. Michael burst through the door, soaked to the bone. The bridge is flooding, he said, setting a lantern on the table. We'll lose power soon. I've called the town, but the roads are already closing. Claire tried to stay calm, but the baby was crying, a sharp, frightened wail that pierced through the howling wind. She rocked him gently, whispering, It's okay, Noah. Mommy's here. Yet even as she said it, she wasn't sure she believed it. The lights flickered once, twice, and went out. Darkness swallowed the room. The only sound was rain hammering the roof. Michael lit the lantern, the golden glow trembling in his hand. We'll have to ride it out, he said. The generator's down. Claire nodded, clutching Noah tighter. How bad is it? Bad enough that no one's coming until morning. He looked at her, hesitating. You should get some rest. But sleep was impossible. Every gust of wind sounded like a warning. Every creak of the wood reminded her that danger had a way of finding her, even in the most hidden places. She sat by the window, staring at the ocean that had both sheltered and imprisoned her. Then, in a flash of lightning, she saw it. Headlights cutting through the rain, a car crawling along the flooded road. Michael, she whispered. Someone's out there. He joined her at the window, his face tightening. No one should be driving in this, not unless. The sentence died on his lips. The car turned into their driveway, tires hissing on wet gravel. Claire's heart slammed in her chest. She recognized that shape, sleek, black, unyielding. The Mercedes. Michael grabbed his coat. Stay here, he ordered. Claire didn't move. Her hands trembled as she watched him disappear into the storm. Minutes felt like hours. The rain pounded harder, leaking through the roof. Then came shouting, muffled, distant, but unmistakable. Michael's voice. She laid Noah gently in his crib, then ran to the door. The cold hit her like knives as she stepped into the storm, the wind nearly knocking her off her feet. Lightning split the sky. And for a moment, she saw them. Michael standing inches from another man, fists clenched, rain pouring down their faces. Ethan. He looked nothing like the man she remembered. His hair was longer, his clothes soaked and torn. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something raw. Desperation. "Claire," he shouted through the roar of wind. "Please." Michael blocked his path. "You shouldn't be here." "I needed to see her," Ethan cried. "I didn't come to take her away. I just needed to know she was alive." Claire's voice broke through the chaos. "Why now, Ethan?" He turned toward her, eyes shining with a grief she didn't recognize. "Because I finally understand what I destroyed. I don't want forgiveness. I just want to help you if you'll let me." Tomane. Another bolt of lightning struck nearby, shaking the ground. The wind screamed louder, and suddenly, the cottage roof gave way with a cracking sound. Michael grabbed Noah's crib as debris flew. Claire screamed, reaching for her son. Ethan lunged forward, shielding them both with his body, as part of the ceiling collapsed behind him. When the storm finally began to fade, the three of them sat huddled in the corner, soaked, shivering, but alive. Noah's small hand reached up and grabbed Ethan's soaked shirt, holding tight. For the first time, Claire didn't pull him away. Morning broke pale and fragile after the storm. The sea was calmer now, though broken branches and debris littered the shore. Inside the damaged cottage, the smell of wet wood and smoke lingered. Claire sat by the fireplace, her son wrapped in a blanket against her chest. Across the room, Ethan stood silently, drying his hair with a towel. The bandage on his arm was fresh. He'd been cut saving them from the collapsing roof. Michael leaned against the wall, glaring at him. "You shouldn't have come," he said flatly. Ethan's voice was low but steady. "You think I planned to show up in a hurricane? I didn't even know she was here until the road signs disappeared behind me. I just drove north until I couldn't anymore." Michael scoffed. "And what? You thought you'd show up, play the hero, and she'd forget everything you did." "Stop," Claire said quietly. Both men turned toward her. Her voice shook, but her eyes were firm. "No more fighting. Not here. Not in front of him." She looked down at Noah, who had fallen asleep against her shoulder. "He's seen enough storms already." Ethan took a step closer. "Claire, I didn't come for pity or forgiveness. I came because I needed to face what I did, to see what I destroyed." "So." She looked up at him, her face pale in the morning light. "Destroyed is the right word," she said softly. "Do you know what it's like to sit alone with a newborn, praying a fever will break while your husband's phone goes to voicemail? Do you know what it's like to realize the man you trusted would rather be seen with someone else than hold his child?" Ethan's voice cracked. "Every day since, I've replayed that night. Every call I ignored, every lie I told. I don't deserve your forgiveness, I know that. But please, let me at least help now. Let me be a father to him." Michael stepped forward. "You think you can just walk back into her life and play dad? You're lucky I haven't thrown you back into that storm." Ethan didn't flinch. "You don't have to like me. Just let me try to do one thing right." Claire's eyes glistened. "You can't undo what's been done." He nodded slowly. "No. But maybe I can stop more pain from coming." He reached into his coat and pulled out a folder, soaked but intact. "Sabrina's trying to destroy you. She's feeding the media false information about your foundation. She's tying it to my old accounts. I came to warn you before it's too late." Michael grabbed the folder, flipping through the pages. "This could ruin her." Claire's face paled. "She's doing this to hurt me?" Ethan shook his head. "To hurt me. You're just collateral damage. Just teen." For a moment, silence filled the room except for the crackle of the fire. Claire stood and walked toward him, her bare feet silent on the wood floor. "You could have sent a lawyer. You didn't have to come yourself." "I couldn't let someone else protect you again," he said simply. Something in his tone broke her guard, if only for a second. He looked exhausted, his once proud shoulders slumped, his hands trembling slightly. This wasn't the man who had abandoned her for luxury. This was a man stripped bare of everything but regret. Michael's voice softened. "If this leak goes public, the feds will investigate her too." Ethan nodded. "That's why I need to go back to New York. I'll take the blame. I'll sign whatever confession they want. She and the baby stay untouched. Claire blinked back tears. You'd ruin yourself for us? He smiled faintly. That's the easiest decision I've ever made. Paulin. Outside, the gray sky began to clear, light spilling through the broken window. Claire watched him leave the cottage and walk toward his car, the ocean wind whipping through his hair. For the first time, she didn't feel hatred, only the ache of something that still refused to die. The drive back to Manhattan took Ethan 10 hours through endless gray rain. Every mile felt heavier, a countdown to whatever reckoning waited at the end of the road. Holt had warned him. Once he confessed, there would be no going back. But Ethan wasn't thinking about his empire anymore. He was thinking about Claire, a trembling voice, her eyes filled with both fury and something dangerously close to compassion. When he reached the city, the skyline didn't feel like home. It looked like judgment. His old penthouse, once a beacon of wealth and pride, now sat dark and empty. He checked into a cheap hotel on the Lower East Side and spent the night drafting a confession, one that would clear Claire's name and expose his own crimes. He wrote slowly, deliberately. I, Ethan Cole, acknowledge that I falsified company accounts to protect my personal holdings. The Claire Morgan Foundation had no knowledge or involvement in these transactions. Any accusations against Claire Cole are the result of my deceit alone. When he finished, he signed it and stared at the page until the ink blurred. The next morning, he handed the confession to a journalist from the Chronicle. Print it, he said. Everything. The woman looked startled. You're sure? This will destroy what's left of your reputation. It's already gone, he replied. But maybe it'll give her a chance to live. By noon, the story was everywhere. Ethan Cole confesses to financial fraud, exonerates wife. The same networks that once celebrated his rise now devoured his fall. Reporters camped outside the courthouse, his name trending alongside words like shame and betrayal. That night, he sat on a park bench near the river, the city lights reflecting in the black water. His phone buzzed with dozens of messages, lawyers, former partners, old friends begging him to retract his statement. He ignored them all. Then, one text appeared from an unknown number. You shouldn't have done this. M. Michael. Ethan hesitated, then replied, Tell her it's over, she's free. A few minutes later came the response. She already was. He closed his eyes, breathing in the cold wind that cut through his coat. Somewhere, he hoped Claire was asleep, her son safe beside her. That thought alone made the ruin worth it. But the universe wasn't finished with him yet. Just past midnight, his phone rang again. This time, it was the hospital in Rockport. The nurse's voice trembled. Mr. Cole, your son was admitted an hour ago. High fever, severe infection. Mrs. Cole requested you be notified. Ethan's blood ran cold. Is he Fanny? He's stable, but it's critical. The nearest pediatric surgeon is in Boston. We're arranging emergency transport. He didn't think. He just ran. 6 hours later, he was in the hospital corridor, disheveled, out of breath, and terrified. Through the glass window of the small intensive care unit, he saw Claire sitting beside Noah's bed, holding the boy's hand. The machines beeped softly, fragile reminders of how thin the line between life and loss really was. She looked up when she felt his presence. Their eyes met through the glass. For the first time, there was no anger, only exhaustion, fear, and something deeper neither could name. He pushed open the door, and Claire didn't stop him. He walked to the bedside and gently touched his son's tiny arm. Hey, little man, he whispered. It's Dad. Noah stirred slightly, his eyelids fluttering. Claire's voice was soft but unsteady. He kept calling for you in his sleep. Ethan swallowed hard. I'm here now. The doctor entered, explaining the situation in a rush. Noah would need immediate surgery. Ethan turned to Claire. Let me handle it. I'll pay for everything. Please, just let me do this one thing right. Friam. She nodded slowly, tears spilling over. Just don't disappear again. He met her gaze. Never. That night, Ethan stayed awake beside the hospital bed, his hand over his son's. Every beep of the monitor was a reminder of the life he almost lost twice. And for the first time in years, he prayed. The surgery lasted 4 agonizing hours. Ethan paced the corridor outside the pediatric operating room like a man awaiting his own verdict. Every second that passed was punishment for years of selfishness. Through the glass wall, he could see the faint outline of his son's small body under bright surgical lights, a sight that reduced him from Titan to nothing but a father praying for mercy. Claire sat nearby, hands clasped, lips trembling in silent prayer. The same woman he'd once left crying alone in their penthouse was now the strongest person in the room. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. They said the infection spread fast. If we'd come any later. She stopped, unable to finish. Ethan lowered himself into the seat beside her. He's a fighter, he said softly. He gets that from you. Claire didn't look at him. He almost didn't make it because of you. If you hadn't, he interrupted gently. I know. Then quieter. I know, Claire. For a long moment, the only sound was the rhythmic hum of hospital machines. Finally, the surgeon emerged, fatigue etched on his face. He's stable, he said. The operation was successful. He'll need time to recover, but your son's going to be okay. The relief was so sharp it almost hurt. Claire broke down, covering her face with her hands. Ethan exhaled shakily, his shoulders trembling. Thank you, he whispered, but the doctor had already moved on to the next emergency. When the nurse allowed them inside, Noah was asleep beneath soft white sheets, his tiny chest rising and falling slowly. Claire sat by his bedside, stroking his hair. Ethan stood behind her, his hands in his pockets, afraid to breathe too loudly. He looks like you when he sleeps, she said quietly. Ethan swallowed hard. Then I'll make sure he never becomes like me when he wakes. That night, as Claire rested her head against the bed, Ethan slipped out of the room. He found the hospital chapel, a small, dim space lined with flickering candles. He wasn't a man who prayed, but now he knelt, the cold tile beneath him grounding the moment. If you let him live, he whispered, take whatever's left of me instead. It wasn't a deal. It was surrender. The next morning, sunlight cut through the blinds. Noah was awake, small fingers reaching toward the light. Claire smiled through her exhaustion. Ethan stood at the foot of the bed, watching silently. When she caught his gaze, she said softly, "You didn't have to stay." "I wanted to," he replied. "I needed to." "Well." Claire studied him, her eyes filled with something uncertain. Not forgiveness, not yet, but the first flicker of understanding. "He'll need physical therapy, medicine, time," she said. "I'll take care of it," Ethan answered. She shook her head. "You've already lost everything. You don't owe us anything." He smiled faintly. "Maybe not. But I owe him everything." Over the following weeks, Ethan remained in Maine. He volunteered at the hospital, quietly donating under anonymous checks. He rebuilt the clinic's storm-damaged roof himself, hammering nails into the wood with blistered hands. The townspeople, once wary of the stranger with haunted eyes, began to nod when he passed by. One afternoon, Claire found him painting the fence outside the cottage, sleeves rolled up, sun glinting off his arm. "You're not the man I married," she said, crossing her arms. Ethan paused, lowering the brush. "I know. You're trying too hard." He turned toward her, eyes steady. "No, Claire. I'm trying just enough." For the first time in years, she smiled. Small, reluctant, but real. As she turned back toward the house, he whispered to himself, piece by piece. Because redemption, he was learning, didn't come all at once. It came quietly, in the sound of a child's laughter, the weight of a hammer, and the slow forgiveness of a woman who once believed he was lost forever. The winter sun over Manhattan did little to warm the chill in the air. Ethan Cole stood on the courthouse steps, watching a crowd of reporters push forward like vultures circling the dying remains of his past. Cameras flashed, microphones thrust toward him, questions flying like shards of glass. "Mr. Cole, is it true you've surrendered your remaining assets? Did your mistress blackmail you? Are you still in contact with your wife?" He said nothing. Silence was his final defense. Beside him, his attorney whispered, "You don't have to face her in person. The deposition can be remote." Ethan shook his head. "No, I need to see it end." Inside, the courtroom was cold and sterile, filled with murmurs. At the defendant's table sat Sabrina Voss, immaculate as ever, but the glamour was cracking. Her once flawless skin was pale, her eyes rimmed red from sleepless nights. She wore confidence like a costume now, one she could no longer afford. When the judge entered, all noise died. The prosecution began laying out evidence, screenshots, emails, financial transfers. Sabrina's voice, recorded on a phone call, played through the speakers. "If he doesn't pay, I'll make sure his wife's foundation burns with him." A gasp rippled through the room. Even Sabrina flinched. Ethan watched her face carefully, but there was no satisfaction in seeing her crumble. Only exhaustion. She had been the mirror to his own worst self, greedy, manipulative, hollow. When it was his turn to testify, Ethan rose slowly. "I'm not here to destroy her," he said quietly. "We both built our lives on deceit. The difference is, I stopped." The judge raised an eyebrow. "And why should the court believe that, Mr. Cole?" "Because I've already lost everything worth lying for." Sabrina's attorney tried to counter, but the evidence was overwhelming. The leaked files, the blackmail payments, the offshore accounts under her name. It all painted the same picture. By the time the closing statements ended, Sabrina's mask had fully shattered. When the verdict came, guilty on charges of extortion and corporate fraud, she didn't cry. She just stared at Ethan, eyes glistening, lips trembling with something between hatred and sorrow. As the guards led her away, she turned to him and whispered, "You think you've won, but redemption doesn't erase who you were." He met her gaze calmly. "No, but it lets me start over." So, outside, the press swarmed again, but Ethan ignored them. He walked down the steps into the biting wind, the first flakes of snow drifting through the city. He passed a Tiffany window display, glittering rings under soft yellow light, and thought of Claire's wedding band, the one she had left on their kitchen counter the night she vanished. That evening, Holt called. "You made the right move," he said. "She'll serve time. The story's fading. Claire's name is clean again." "See, I didn't do it for headlines," Ethan said. "I know. But the world loves a redemption arc. People are already calling you the man who burned his empire to rebuild his soul." Ethan almost laughed. "I'm not rebuilt. Not yet." After hanging up, he looked out at the skyline glowing beneath the snow. He thought about Maine, the quiet waves, the little clinic, his son's laugh. For the first time, the city that once defined him felt small. A week later, a letter arrived at Claire's cottage. No signature, just a single sentence written in Ethan's handwriting. "She's gone. You're free." Claire read it twice, her fingers trembling. Then she folded it neatly and tucked it into the wooden box where she kept the unsent letters, her silent archive of everything they had survived. Outside, the tide rolled in gentle and steady. And somewhere miles away, a man walked alone through the snow, no longer running from his past, only toward the possibility of grace. Spring came late to New York that year. For months, the city had worn a coat of gray, but on this morning, sunlight spilled across the streets like a promise. Ethan Cole adjusted his tie in the mirror, almost not recognizing the man staring back. No longer the billionaire in tailored Tom Ford suits. No longer the tabloid disgrace. The newspapers now called him something different, the man who rebuilt with honor. It had been 6 months since Sabrina's conviction. 6 months since Ethan walked away from the world that worshipped money and applause. In that time, he'd sold his last property, liquidated what remained of his shares, and donated every cent to the Noah Foundation for Children's Health, named after his son. The board of directors of Mount Sinai Hospital had invited him and Claire to speak at the opening ceremony of the new pediatric wing. He hadn't seen her in person since Maine. Letters had replaced words, their messages slow and cautious, full of wounds stitched but not yet healed. Now, standing backstage in the gleaming marble lobby of the hospital, he felt his pulse quicken as the announcer said her name. "Please welcome Claire Morgan Cole, founder of the Harbor Clinic and co-chair of the Noah Foundation." Applause filled the hall. She stepped up to the podium, radiant in a simple navy dress, her hair falling loosely over her shoulders. She didn't look like the woman he'd left behind. She looked like the woman she was always meant to be. Claire began to speak, her voice steady, measured. "When we built this wing, it wasn't just about saving lives. It was about rebuilding faith in ourselves, in compassion, in the idea that people can change." She paused, then looked directly at him through the crowd. "Even the ones who've lost everything. The audience murmured softly. Ethan's throat tightened. For a moment, the world fell silent between them. When it was his turn, he walked up to the podium slowly, hands slightly trembling. "I've spent most of my life building things that touch the sky," he said. "Skyscrapers, companies, empires. But they all collapsed because I forgot what mattered on the ground. My wife reminded me, through her strength, her silence, and her mercy, that the greatest legacy a man can leave isn't made of steel or glass. It's made of forgiveness." There was no applause at first, only stillness, the kind that meant people were listening. Then the sound grew, wave after wave, until the entire room stood in ovation. After the ceremony, he found Claire standing alone by the hospital's rooftop garden. The city stretched out below them, bathed in gold. Noah played nearby with a nurse, laughing, the kind of laughter that once seemed impossible. "You spoke beautifully," she said without turning. "I meant every word," he replied. Claire looked at him, her expression unreadable. "People are calling you a hero now." Ethan shook his head. "Heroes don't destroy the things they love." She smiled faintly. "Maybe heroes are just people who learn too late but still try." They stood in silence, the wind brushing past them. Then she said, softly, "I didn't think you'd come today." "I had to," he admitted. "I needed to see the life you built without me." Claire turned toward him fully. "It wasn't without you, Ethan. It was because of you. Because losing you forced me to become someone stronger." Her honesty cut deeper than any insult ever could. Yet it also healed something in him. As the sun began to set, the three of them, father, mother, and child, stood together for the first time without fear. Claire reached out, her fingers brushing his hand. "He's old enough to understand someday," she said softly. "When he asks who you are, what should I tell him?" Ethan's voice was low, steady. "Tell him I'm a man who forgot what love was, and spent the rest of his life learning how to deserve it." The air outside Mount Sinai Hospital shimmered with spring warmth, the kind of New York morning that smelled of fresh coffee and second chances. Banners rippled in the breeze above the grand entrance. The Noah Cole Pediatric Wing, a new beginning. Cameras flashed, journalists clustered near velvet ropes, and a crowd of donors murmured with anticipation. Ethan stood in the lobby, straightening the cuff of his modest navy suit. Gone were the luxury brands, the gold watch, the arrogance that once defined him. The man in the mirror now carried quiet strength, and the faint lines of someone who had paid in full for his mistakes. He had been invited, not as a CEO, but as the man who helped fund a vision born from regret and rebuilt with purpose. "Mr. Cole," a volunteer said, handing him a program. "You'll be seated in the second row, Mrs." Cole insisted. For a moment, he froze. Mrs. Cole. Hearing the name spoken aloud struck something deep and fragile inside him. He nodded silently, following the usher toward his seat. At the front of the room, Claire stood behind a podium, her calm presence commanding attention. Dressed simply in ivory, she looked like light personified. Steady, strong, untouchable. Her voice carried softly through the hall. "When this project began," she said, "it wasn't about redemption. It was about healing, for children, for families, and maybe even for ourselves. Pain can destroy you, or it can teach you how to rebuild. We chose the latter." Applause rippled through the crowd. Ethan's chest ached with pride and shame intertwined. When it was his turn to speak, he walked slowly to the stage. Every camera lens followed him, the fallen magnate now standing where he had once only appeared in headlines of disgrace. He took a breath and faced the audience. "6 years ago," he began, "I thought success meant skyscrapers and profit margins. But when I lost everything, my company, my reputation, my family, I discovered what true poverty looks like. It's not about money, it's about meaning. And the woman sitting in the front row," he paused, his voice thickening, "taught me that meaning is something you build, not something you buy." The crowd was silent. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. "I stand here today not as a businessman," he continued, "but as a man who's learning to be a father, a partner, a better human. The Noah Foundation isn't about my redemption. It's about hers, the woman who had every reason to hate me, but chose to help the world instead." When he stepped away from the podium, the applause that followed was thunderous, not for his words, but for the sincerity behind them. Later, as the ceremony ended, Ethan found Claire standing in the rooftop garden overlooking Central Park. The city stretched beneath them, golden in the fading light. Their son, Noah, ran along the path with a red balloon, laughing freely, unaware of the gravity surrounding the adults who'd once nearly destroyed his world. Claire turned as Ethan approached. "You did well," she said softly. He smiled. "You built this. I just followed your lead." Bah. For a moment, they stood in silence, the distance between them smaller than it had been in years. "You've changed," she admitted. "But sometimes I wonder if people really do. Or if they just learn how to hide their scars better." Ethan looked at her, eyes sincere. "I used to hide behind everything: money, power, pride. Now the scars are all I have, and maybe that's okay. They're proof I survived the person I used to be." Claire studied him, her expression unreadable. Then, quietly, she said, "You didn't just survive, Ethan. You grew." He exhaled slowly, as if her words alone had lifted the weight of years. In the distance, Noah's laughter echoed through the rooftop. Ethan looked at his son, then back at Claire. "You gave me a second chance," he said. "Not everyone gets that." She smiled faintly, eyes glistening in the twilight. "Then don't waste it." And for the first time in his life, Ethan didn't. The gala at the River Cafe shimmered against the Brooklyn skyline, the city lights glittering on the East River like fragments of a broken crown. It had been a full year since the opening of the Noah Foundation's pediatric wing, a year of quiet rebuilding, of boundaries and beginnings. Tonight, Ethan Cole stood on the restaurant's terrace, the hum of jazz and laughter floating behind him. He wore a simple black tuxedo, no designer logos, no excess, just a man waiting for a moment he wasn't sure he deserved. The event was a celebration of the Foundation's success. Hundreds of children saved, clinics funded across New England. But for Ethan, it wasn't about applause or photographs. It was about one person, Claire. He hadn't seen her since the hospital ceremony. Their letters had become rarer, their words careful, full of warmth, yet cautious, like two people afraid to touch old wounds. He didn't know if she'd come tonight. Part of him believed she wouldn't. The other part, the part that had learned to hope, believed she might. A gentle voice cut through his thoughts. "You still hate crowds, don't you?" He turned, and there she was. Claire stood framed in the soft glow of the terrace lights, her navy gown flowing like the river beneath them. Her hair was pinned back loosely, a few strands brushing her cheek. She looked timeless. Ethan's breath caught. "You came." "I almost didn't," she admitted. "But then I remembered what this place means." He smiled faintly. "The River Cafe. Our first anniversary dinner. You said it felt like floating between two worlds, the city behind us, the water beneath us. And I told you," she said with a small laugh, "that one day you'd have to choose which one you wanted to live in." Ethan stepped closer, his eyes soft. "I finally did." She looked at him for a long moment before speaking. "You look different. Older. Wiser," she said simply. They walked along the terrace railing, the distant hum of traffic blending with the sound of waves lapping against the pier. Inside, a jazz singer crooned softly about second chances. "How's Noah?" Ethan asked quietly. "Happy," she said. "He loves the ocean. Michael teaches him to fish every weekend. He still keeps that little wooden car you made him by his bed." Ethan smiled. "I'm surprised it's still in one piece." Claire turned toward him, her voice softening. "He asks about you sometimes." His chest tightened. "What do you tell him?" "I tell him his father's learning how to be a good man." He swallowed hard. "Am I?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached into her clutch and handed him an envelope. "Read this later. It's from Noah." Ethan looked down at it, the uneven handwriting, the faint smudge of a child's thumbprint. He held it like something sacred. Claire's eyes met his. "He doesn't remember what happened between us. He just knows you built a hospital for kids like him. That's what matters now." Ethan took a deep breath. "And what about you, Claire? What matters for you?" She hesitated. "Peace. I didn't think I'd ever find it. But watching you rebuild, not for attention, not for power. Maybe that's part of my peace too." They stood close now, the city glowing behind them, the night humming softly around their silence. "I don't expect anything," Ethan said. "Not forgiveness, not another chance. I just wanted to see you happy. Claire smiled, a single tear glinting in the light. You don't have to expect it. Sometimes life surprises you. At that moment, Noah appeared at the terrace door, holding a red balloon and grinning wide. Mommy, look, they have chocolate cake. Claire laughed, bending to kiss his forehead. Go ahead, sweetheart. Noah ran off again, his laughter echoing through the night. Ethan watched him go, eyes shining with quiet awe. Claire looked back at him. He's waiting for you, you know. He wants his father at his next school event. Ethan's voice cracked. If you'll let me. She nodded, smiling through tears. We both will. As the city lights reflected on the river, Ethan realized this wasn't a fairy tale ending. It was something better. It was real. The morning after the gala, New York felt different, softer somehow, as if the whole city had exhaled. The clouds parted, spilling sunlight over Central Park, and the air carried that first fragile whisper of spring. Ethan Cole walked down the familiar paths lined with budding cherry trees, his hands deep in his coat pockets, his heart heavier and lighter all at once. Ahead, near the lake, he spotted her. Claire sat on a weathered bench, her hair catching the sunlight, a paper cup of coffee in her hands. She looked peaceful, not the fragile peace that comes from running, but the kind born after surviving every storm. Beside her, Noah knelt by the water, tossing breadcrumbs to ducks, his laughter echoing through the still air. Ethan paused for a moment, simply watching them. The scene was so simple, so pure, it almost hurt. For years, he'd imagined moments like this, not the grand gestures or luxury vacations, but mornings that felt honest, mornings that felt like home. Claire turned, sensing his presence before he spoke. You're early, she said, smiling faintly. I didn't sleep, he admitted. Guess I didn't want to miss this. He sat down beside her, careful to keep a respectful distance. The silence between them wasn't tense anymore. It felt earned. Noah turned around, waving excitedly. Dad, look. They follow me when I throw food. Ethan's chest tightened at the word Dad. It had been so long since he'd heard it without pain. You've got away with them, he said, his voice catching slightly. Claire smiled. He's got your patience. Ethan laughed quietly. You must be thinking of someone else. She sipped her coffee, eyes focused on the water. He doesn't know the details. He's too young. But he knows his father came back. I almost didn't, Ethan said honestly. There were nights I thought disappearing would be easier. Claire glanced at him, her expression soft but steady. Running is always easier, but harder to live with. He nodded. I spent years building towers no one remembers. And now, a single laugh from him feels like the only thing that matters. Claire looked at him for a long time, then said, You've changed, Ethan. Truly changed. I'm trying, he said. Every day. She exhaled, eyes glistening. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if that night hadn't broken everything? Ethan's voice was low. We'd still be pretending to be happy, and I'd still be too blind to know what I was losing. She smiled sadly. Maybe we had to fall apart to become who we were meant to be. The wind shifted, scattering petals from the cherry trees. Noah ran toward them, laughing as the petals clung to his hair. He threw himself into Ethan's arms, giggling. Dad, are you coming to my school show next week? Ethan held him close. Wouldn't miss it for the world. Bye. Claire watched them, her hand unconsciously brushing the spot on her finger where her wedding ring used to be. I don't know what the future looks like, she said softly. But I know this. I'm not angry anymore. Ethan looked up, eyes wide. You're not? She shook her head. Anger kept me safe. But forgiveness, it's what finally set me free. He couldn't speak. The weight of her words sank into him deeper than any punishment ever had. Noah tugged at Claire's sleeve. Mommy, can Daddy come home for dinner? She hesitated, then looked at Ethan. Would you? He nodded slowly, his voice breaking. I'd love nothing more. As they walked toward the park exit, sunlight glinted off the lake, turning the water to gold. Claire reached for Noah's hand. Then, after a pause, reached for Ethan's too. It wasn't a grand reunion. It was something far rarer, the quiet, trembling rebirth of trust. The house in Maine was quiet again, but not empty. The sea outside hummed its eternal rhythm. waves brushing against the cliffs as if whispering blessings. A year had passed since that morning in Central Park, the morning when forgiveness became more than a word. Now, life had found its own rhythm. Claire's clinic thrived. The town trusted her. And Ethan, against every odd, had stayed. He'd bought a small house near the harbor, nothing like the penthouses he once owned. The walls smelled of cedar and paint. The floorboards creaked with character. Every morning, he woke before sunrise, brewed coffee, and walked to the pier with Noah. Sometimes they fished, sometimes they just talked about nothing. But for Ethan, each conversation felt like redemption carved into time. Claire arrived that morning with a basket of muffins and a soft smile. "You still don't lock your door," she teased, setting the basket on the table. Ethan grinned. "Guess I like the idea that someone might walk in." She shook her head, half smiling. "You've changed, Ethan Cole." He poured her coffee into a worn ceramic mug. "For the better, I hope." "For the quieter," she replied, taking a sip. "I didn't think you'd ever learn how to sit still." He leaned against the counter, watching her. "Maybe I just needed a reason to." The morning sunlight poured through the windows, painting everything in gold. It felt like the kind of peace neither of them thought they'd earn. Later that day, they attended the annual town fair. Children's laughter mixed with the scent of caramel and salt air. Noah ran ahead with a wooden airplane in his hands, a toy Ethan had carved himself. Claire walked beside him, the distance between them smaller now, natural. "Remember when you couldn't stand small towns?" she asked, glancing at him. He chuckled. "Yeah. Now I can't imagine leaving one." Chazelle. As evening settled, the three of them stood by the shoreline watching the fireworks bloom over the water. Claire's hand brushed his lightly. He didn't move, afraid the moment might break. "Do you still miss it?" she asked. "The city, the power, the noise." He shook his head. "No. I used to chase applause. Now I chase quiet. And I've learned quiet can be loud in all the right ways." She smiled, turning her eyes back to the sky. "You sound like a poet." He laughed softly. "No, just a man who ran out of excuses." A burst of gold lit up the waves, reflecting across her face. She looked at him, her expression unreadable but tender. "You've done more than change, Ethan. You've healed. Only because you let me try," he said. For a while, they didn't speak. The fireworks faded, leaving behind the steady whisper of the sea. Noah ran toward them, laughing, his small hand gripping theirs. "Mom, Dad, can we stay up and watch the stars?" Claire smiled. Just for a little while. They spread a blanket on the sand, the three of them lying beneath a sky stitched with constellations. Noah fell asleep first, his head resting between them. Claire turned her gaze to Ethan. "Do you ever think about the night it all started?" He nodded slowly. "All the time. But I don't hate it anymore. Because it brought me here." She looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time in years, her eyes softened with something that wasn't guarded. "Maybe," she whispered. "We needed to lose each other to find ourselves." Ethan reached out, his hand covering hers. "And maybe," he said, his voice barely above the waves, "we were never really lost, just waiting to come home." The tide moved closer, kissing the edge of the blanket, as if sealing their words in salt and light. Above them, a final streak of gold crossed the sky. Fleeting, but bright enough to believe in again. So, that's how our story ends. If you're still here, my friend, then something in this journey must have touched you. Maybe not the drama, but the quiet truth behind it. Because at its heart, this wasn't just about betrayal, loss, or redemption. It was about what Marcus Aurelius once wrote: "The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts." Ethan learned that no empire, no wealth, no power can heal a heart that refuses to face itself. But when we finally stop running, when we dare to stand still and take responsibility, healing begins. Maybe you, too, have a storm you're trying to survive. Maybe forgiveness feels impossible right now. But remember what the Stoics taught. Pain isn't punishment. It's preparation. We grow stronger not by escaping what broke us, but by learning how to rise from it. So if this story moved you, even a little, give it a like. Share it with someone who needs hope. And subscribe to stay with us for more stories that remind you. No matter how far you fall, you can always rebuild, one honest step at a time. Because redemption, my friend, is never too late. It just begins the moment you decide to begin again.